Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. Really? Seriously? Tell that to Adam Goodes, an AFL footballer, an Aboriginal man at the peak of his football career, after he was called an ape by a young woman spectator at an AFL game early last year. About 5 months after that incident, Adam Goodes was talking about it and what happened after he came off the field. And he said, "I went downstairs and lost it emotionally. It just really cut me deep, and I didn't want to be on the ground anymore." He didn't want to be on the ground, the place where he's a champion, the place he should be at his absolute most comfortable. Lots of people said about him that he was overreacting. Effectively, they were asking him to toughen up, get over it. In response to that, what Adam Goodes said was, unless those people have a real good think about what it means, about what I've gone through in my life, about what my mother has gone through in her life, about what our people have gone through in the last 200 years, then they might understand how a simple name can really cut someone so deep. For me, it was just shattering. It seems it was particularly shattering for Adam Goodes because it was words spoken by a young woman, a teenage girl, unconscious of the impact. So imagine for a moment if it weren't somebody like Adam Goodes, a man at the peak of his career, a guy who's tough and resilient. Imagine for a moment if it was a young person who's come to Australia as a humanitarian entrant, who's a teenager, and like all teenagers wants to fit in, wants to become part of the crowd. Well, you don't have to imagine, because here's the words of one such teenager. Racism can make you feel so sad and bad about yourself. It hurts. And if we keep ignoring it, they'll think we are okay with it and that it doesn't matter. We are not okay with it. Words can hurt and they can cause depression and violence. Racist words can kill because they can make you feel so bad and so isolated. Yet some people argue that freedom of expression means that we are all free to say what we want, when we want, about whoever we want, irrespective of the harm it might cause. I'm here to challenge that view and to talk about the need to understand that freedom of expression is about challenging oppression, about encouraging participation and engagement, not about causing oppression and marginalisation. Because words can and do cause real and lasting harm, there are limits on freedom of expression. Limits that are valid and justified, limits that improve everyone's opportunity to exercise that freedom, to participate in society and to enjoy all their rights and freedoms. So why am I talking about this at the moment? Why is it important? You might have noticed that there's been a bit of discussion in the media recently about freedom of expression and about the limits placed on freedom of expression by discrimination laws. Freedom of expression. It's one of the great liberal democratic freedoms, along with, for example, freedom of association. They're freedoms that for us go back at least to the English Civil War of the 17th century and to the restoration of the monarchy. It was a time when the absolute power of the monarchy and abuse of that power was being challenged by the people. It was a time when those freedoms were necessary to enable that challenge, a time when it was very dangerous to speak out against power, against the Crown. Some people are arguing that freedom of expression is being undermined by discrimination law, by the protection of rights we find in discrimination law, because those laws seek to place limits on the words we say, on the expression of our views. The law seeks to stop or to limit what people say. It seeks to say that we have to think before we speak. This issue was a particularly hot topic in 2011 when a federal court judge found that Andrew Bolt and the Herald and Weekly Times had breached Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. It found that that was the case because of articles that Bolt had written in which he challenged the Aboriginality of a number of quite prominent Aboriginal people in our society, effectively asserting they were pretending to be Aboriginal in order to gain certain benefits. In considering that case, the judge had to consider whether or not Andrew Bolt had access to a defence in the law, a defence that permits racially offensive, humiliating, intimidating or insulting speech if it's done reasonably and in good faith. The judge in that case found that the defence wasn't available because, among other things, the articles contained errors of fact, distortions of the truth and inflammatory, provocative language. That case really highlighted what appears to be a contest of ideas. The competition between our right to be free from discrimination on one hand and our freedom to express our views on the other. Discrimination law isn't the only law, however, that seeks to place limits on speech. Our criminal law does it, as does defamation law. Yet it's only discrimination law that's being challenged at the moment. And I think that that reflects, in part, different attitudes to free speech depending on who the speech is about and who's doing the speaking. Our attitudes and the views in the debate very much reflect, I think, different life experiences, different understanding of rights and freedoms, and different understandings of the harm that are caused by infringements of those rights and freedoms. And perhaps even different attitudes to the underlying importance of human dignity and respect. I suggest that rather than undermining freedom of speech, which is what is asserted in relation to discrimination law, it may well enhance it because it enables greater participation by all people in public debate and discussion and in our society's activities, and thereby enhances our freedoms, and particularly for those who are otherwise silenced by oppressive or prejudiced speech. So what are our human rights and freedoms? Where do we get them from? In Australia, you'd be hard put to find them written down in the statutory law. They're few and far between, and where they exist, they're not necessarily referred to as rights. So we often look at the common law, hard to find rights and freedoms expressed as such in our common law, the law made by the courts. So we turn often to the international framework of human rights, a framework that's founded on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that came into being in December 1948. It came about in response to the atrocities of the Second World War, a war that was marked by genocide, discrimination and racism. It wasn't the first war of that kind, and I'm pretty sure it won't be the last, unfortunately. But it was the war that resulted in the declaration at an international level of those fundamental rights and freedoms that could be agreed as universal. Rights and freedoms that you and I and all others share because we're human beings. So what are those rights and freedoms? They include, for example, freedom of expression and opinion, and the right to be free from discrimination and the right to equality. Those rights and freedoms are necessarily interconnected. They're understood to work together, to be mutually supportive. No one right can be fully enjoyed unless all are protected. And in the case of a conflict or an apparent contest between rights, no single right or freedom trumps the others. It's really important that we understand that, and we seek to work out how to balance the rights and freedoms to ensure that everybody enjoys them and that everybody can participate in creating a society that's good for all of us. And that's really why we have human rights and freedoms. It's also really important to understand that human rights and freedoms aren't just about the individual, they're also about the good of our society. In the Universal Declaration, the opening words recognise that the inherent dignity and non-discrimination ensure that every person has access to the same opportunities to develop their full human potential. Recognises that the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice and peace in the world. That requires that we respect every person's rights. And the Universal Declaration closes with a reminder that while each and every one of us should enjoy those rights and freedoms, that we have a duty to respect the rights and freedoms of others. So one of those rights is the right to freedom from discrimination. We have that right to ensure that every one of us has the opportunity to fulfil our potential, irrespective of our race, our gender, our age, or other characteristics. It's a right or a protection that challenges views that some are less worthy, less able, less deserving of respect. In Australia, the right to equality is recognised and protected in discrimination law, a law I'm pretty familiar with. It's law that seeks to not only protect against discriminatory decisions, but also actions, including words. Words that might be uttered in classrooms or schoolyards, at sporting events, in workplaces, but also on social and in print media. It's interesting because those words do harm. And despite the fact that we have a much better understanding now of emotional and psychological harm and the causes of that harm, we continue, it seems to me, to focus far too much on requiring people to build resilience to that harm, the victims to build resilience, rather than challenging the causes. We tell them to toughen up. I hear the expression toughen up princess in my work. Toughen up, or to get over it. And we do that instead of helping them to use the law to challenge the behaviour. We hear far too rarely people of power and influence saying, this is not okay, and I and the law will stand with you to stop it. It's really important that we understand that discrimination law is about enabling, about encouraging, and that absolute freedom of expression can cause harm to that. So freedom of expression, what is it? Why do we have it? Is it really about enabling people to say what they want, when they want, about whoever they want? Is it about licensing hateful, prejudiced and discriminatory speech? I don't think so. We have freedom of expression because it's necessary to enable things like representative democracy and participation. It's about enabling each and every one of us to develop our ideas and to participate. It's a right, or a freedom, it's a right that allows us to hold those in power accountable and to challenge, to protest against the unfettered and harmful actions of dominant groups in our society. It allows us to test ideas, to question and to explore different approaches to resolving problems. It's a protection that enables us to participate equally in political and societal activities and to develop our own ideas, and through that development, our personalities. It's intended, I think, not to enable the targeting of people because of who they are rather than their ideas and views that they're expressing. I don't think it's intended to enable people to target a group because they share a characteristic. That's not, in my view, consistent with the freedom as it's understood and the reason it's recognised. I guess a question for me is it really inevitable that there's a conflict between our freedom from discrimination on one hand and our right to freedom of expression on the other? In my work, I come across every day the impact that harmful speech and actions do have on people, the impacts of people expressing their prejudice. I see people being excluded from opportunities, either deliberately or inadvertently. I see them withdrawing because they feel so harmed by what they're exposed to. I see people silenced by the actions of others. Let me give you just a couple of examples. During the last federal election campaign, there was a flyer delivered in household letterboxes in some parts of Tasmania. It was a flyer that asserted that lesbians and gay men are compulsive liars. It associated them with disease, drug abuse and child abuse. It asserted that they use drugs and other measures to engage in abhorrent behaviour and that they prey on the vulnerable and young children. It asserted that allowing gay marriage would open up a Pandora's box to all other perversions, including bestiality. And that was just the start of it. It got worse. What harms can and are perpetrated in the name of freedom of expression? In Australia, there's a lot of evidence that lesbians and gay men are more likely to engage in self-harm or suicide, attempt suicide, than other people in our community. And while it's not possible to say that a flyer like that is the cause of that devastation, it's certainly not possible to say that it doesn't have an impact and isn't involved in that devastation. Imagine for a minute what it would have been like, and this happened, I can tell you it happened, for a young gay man living in a rural community in Tasmania to have that flyer delivered to his family's letterbox. It gets opened on the kitchen table. Imagine the devastation, the distress that he felt, and perhaps his family felt as well. Imagine that harm. It happened. People point at my headscarf, and I know that they see it as something to be afraid of. I wish people could look beyond my scarf or my religion to see who I really am. It makes me feel so separate. We can look beyond a person's headscarf and their religion to see the person. But failing to challenge prejudiced views and attitudes being expressed gives permission for people not to do that. The absence or removal of laws that provide protections against such activities send a message to everyone in the community that the expression of prejudice is okay. And a consequence of that is what happened to Adam Goodes. A young woman speaks out at a footy match, yells out the word ape, entirely unconscious of the racist impact of that word. And not only does unfettered speech enable casual racism of that sort, it also enables casual prejudice more broadly. Racism is like a spear wounding me. One racist remark can cancel out 100 friendly things people do. I'm told to ignore it, to walk away. But that does not stop the feeling that I never fit in, I never belong here. In a civilised society, the law should seek to understand that harm and to prevent that wounding and prevent the wounding of individuals. It's the capacity and future of those individuals that flows from their wound. And every wound that is caused, every time it's repeated, it becomes harder and harder to heal. Like when a person is wounded in that way, they are excluded from exercising other rights and freedoms. They're prevented from participating in society. They're afraid to speak because of the likelihood that they'll face further prejudice. They seek to become invisible. We can do better than this. We can and should do better than this. We can seek to understand the harm and the wounding that comes from unfettered expression of views. We can ensure that we have proper protections that enable people to participate in society. Speaking in ways that wound others is not exercising your freedom of expression. It's harmful speech. Sticks and stones do break bones, but they also cause enduring harm to individuals and to our society. Let's seek to promote, protect and fulfil human rights for all by using our freedom of expression in the way it was intended, to challenge oppression and the suppression of rights, rather than to licence the prejudiced views of a few. In the context of the unfettered exercise of freedoms in Charles II's Restoration Court in the 17th century, it's been said, the licence of an unrestrained clique is almost always enjoyed at the expense of the genuine liberty of others. Thank you.